Do you have a single skein of yarn like the ones that I have here laying around, not knowing what to make with it? I know the feeling. In this video I am sharing 10 different patterns that only need one skein of yarn so that you can finally turn those lone skeins into something beautiful. We're going to have a look at a lot of different projects, so whether you have a fingering weight yarn, a worsted weight yarn, or that very special hand-dyed yarn, there's going to be something for everyone. I have also created a bundle on Ravelry, which I'm going to link for you down in the description box below. This is going to contain all of the patterns that I am about to mention, but also a lot more. I think there are more than 80 patterns in the bundle in total, so you should definitely check that out. And by the way, if we haven't met before, my name is Annika and I'm coming to you from Germany. I am a natural yarn dyer as well as an avid knitter, and I love basically everything that is related to the fiber arts. Let's get started. I have sorted the patterns that I am about to mention by yarn weight, so we will start with fingering weight yarn patterns and then move all the way up to worsted weight yarn patterns. Now, if you have a skein of a fingering weight sock yarn laying around like the ones that I have here, of course there is always the possibility to knit a pair of socks. But since this is such an obvious choice, I am not going to show you any sock knitting patterns today. Instead, we're going to have a look at this pattern first, which is a pattern for fingerless mitts. This pattern is called Cloudburst by Ariane Gray and it came out in September of 2018. It calls for either a fingering or a sport weight yarn. She used the Phenol PT2 by Rauma, which is a sport weight yarn with a yardage of 175 meters per 50 grams, and you will need 40 grams of that. So this is also a free pattern, which is always great, with a gauge of 30 stitches and 45 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 2.5, which corresponds to a 3 millimeter needle. The pattern comes in only one size to fit a women's medium hand. And the finished measurements are 17 centimeters or 6.8 inches in the circumference and 21 centimeters or 8.4 inches in the length of the mitts. I think this would make a very lovely project to use, for example, this special hand-dyed fingering weight yarn like the one I have here. And I'm really thinking about casting on for a pair of mitts very soon because my hands, or I in general, tend to get cold all the time, even around the house. The next design that I would like to show you is called Along the Shoreline by Greta Mensen. This one came out in September of 2024 and it calls for a fingering weight yarn as well. It has a gauge of 25 stitches and 36 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 4, which corresponds to a 3.5 millimeter needle. And you will need a yardage of between 284 and 312 yards, which corresponds to 260 to 285 meters. The finished measurements are approximately 54 inches or 137 centimeters in the wingspan along the top edge and 10 inches or 25 centimeters in the width of the shawl. Now, what I really like about this design is the overall minimalistic look and also those cute little eyelets that are placed all around the shawl. Let's move on to the next pattern, and I would like to show you this one called the 100 Stitch Snood by No Frills Knitting. This one came out in December of 2021. It is also a free pattern and the gauge is 27 stitches and 35 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 3, which corresponds to a 3.25 millimeter needle. The yardage that you will need are 219 yards or 200 meters. She used one ball of the Sandnesgarn alpaca silk. The pattern comes in one size and the finished measurements are 17.75 inches or 45 centimeters in the length and 8.75 inches or 22 centimeters in the width. I think this pattern would be perfect even for a beginner knitter because it is so simple, but you should take into account that it works best if you use a more drapey yarn, so something with an alpaca content, for example. And one more fingering weight yarn pattern that I wanted to show you is this one called 12 Elegant Days of Baubles Part 1 by Stacey Lewis. This one came out in November of 2024 and it calls for a gauge of 36 stitches and 56 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 1, which corresponds to a 2.25 millimeter needle. The yardage required to make one bauble is 35 to 45 yards, which corresponds to 32 to 41 meters. And it comes in one size to fit a 2.63 inch or 67 millimeter diameter plastic ornament with negative ease. But personally, I would recommend that you use some natural filling like wool roving instead. So this pattern comes with 4 different bauble patterns and the designer recommends that you work them in a specific order. So you start with day 1 with this textured pattern. Day 2 is this bauble pattern, which features a mix of cables and lace, and I think this one looks very elegant and beautiful. Day 3 has this vintage inspired Selbu stranded colorwork. And day 4 is this beautiful lace design. What I really like about this design is that it comes with different pattern suggestions so that you can really tailor the pattern that you use for the kind of yarn you have, so that you could use the more speckled yarn for one of the simpler designs and a more solid or tonal color for the lace motif, for example. By the time that I record this, we are just a couple of months after Christmas, so not really the time to start making Christmas ornaments quite yet, but I think this would be a perfect pattern to just have in your favorites and maybe remember when we get towards fall and then put out and start working on bauble after bauble whenever you find the time or inspiration to make something Christmassy for your house. And the last pattern that I wanted to show you in the fingering weight yarn category is the Musselburgh by Isolde Teague. Now you might have probably heard about this one already because it is very popular, but since it is just an awesome pattern and also one that I would personally like to make this year, I wanted to add it anyway. So this one was originally written to use up a full skein of fingering weight yarn. She came out with this pattern in December of 2019, but it has since been adapted to fit a number of different gauges, all the way from a lace weight yarn up to a DK weight yarn. And I think it comes in 9 different gauges, which I think is just awesome. So depending on the yarn you use, the gauge is between 9 and 5 stitches per inch or 2.5 centimeters, and it comes in 6 different sizes. So this is an all over stockinette project with a genius construction. You start at the crown and increase, and you can treat the cast on as your gauge swatch, so you do not even have to make a gauge swatch, and then you simply continue knitting until you have the desired circumference, and you basically knit a very long tube, and at the end you do decreases for another crown, and then you can fold the head in on itself, and you have a double layered beanie that you could also wear both inside and out if you choose to use 2 different colors, for example, which I think is just awesome. And I am very much looking forward to casting this one on sometime this year because I have a number of single skeins laying around that would be just perfect for the Musselburgh. And Isolde also included a description on the Ravelry project page that I found quite fitting for this project and that I wanted to read to you. She says, "Have a single skein of yarn you're not sure what to do with? Need something simple to keep your hands busy during Zoom meetings? Looking for a gift that everyone will appreciate? Want to cast on right away without any prep? Cast on today, no swatching required, and discover for yourself why so many knitters have fallen in love with Musselburgh." And with that being said, let's move on to some knitting patterns that will help you use your DK weight skein of yarn. The first pattern that I wanted to show you is this small scarf or shawlette called the Ilana Scarf by Masha Ziablikova. And this one only came out in December of 2024. It calls for a gauge of 26 stitches and 33 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches in the cable stitch. The needles used are a US 4, which corresponds to a 3.5 millimeter needle. The yardage required is 131 yards or 120 meters. It comes in one size with finished measurements of the width at the widest point is 3 inches or 8 centimeters, and the length is 45 inches or 114 centimeters. And if you like this specific cable pattern, there is also a pair of socks, a sweater, and I think even a camisole pattern available. What I really like about these triangular shawlettes is the fact that you can truly use up your full skein. So you can measure the weight of your skein at the beginning, and you usually start at one tip and then keep increasing until you reach the middle, and then you start decreasing, and that's the way the shawl is constructed. So if you keep measuring your yarn that you have left over from time to time, you will know when you have used up almost half of it, and then you can start decreasing, and that way you can make sure to use up pretty much all of the yarn. The next DK weight pattern that I wanted to show you is this cute little pouch called the Rowan Pouch by Flex and Twine or Anne Weil. This design came out in January of 2022, and it calls for a DK weight yarn with a gauge of 20 stitches and 28 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 6, which corresponds to 4 millimeters. The yardage required is 100 to 110 yards, which corresponds to 91 up to 101 meters. The pouch comes in one size with finished measurements with a width of 9 inches or 22.5 centimeters and a height of 6 inches or 15 centimeters. Now, since this is an all over lace pattern, you will need to line the pouch and probably also add a zipper, but it states specifically on the Ravelry project page that you do not need a sewing machine for this. You can do everything by hand. Next up, I wanted to show you another bag because I think this one just looks so cute, and it is called the Ella's Veske or Ella's Boho Bag by Stine Iceland Balke. This one came out in March of 2020, and it calls for a gauge of 23 stitches over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle size used is a US 4, which corresponds to 3.5 millimeters. The yardage required is 87 up to 109 yards, which corresponds to 80 to 100 meters. It comes in one size, and unfortunately there is no information about finished measurements. So this is a very cute cross shoulder bag that only needs 35 grams of yarn. And although it is probably not going to be quite large, I think it would be perfect for those summer days where you only need a place to put maybe your phone or your keys, for example. Next up, let's look at a headband, and this one is called Frida by Emily Lewis. And it is another free pattern that came out in December of 2019. Now, the designer used a skein of fingering weight yarn together with a silk mohair in order to create a DK weight gauge, but I think you could easily swap that out to use a DK weight yarn or maybe even a fingering weight yarn and simply knitting the headband a little bit wider and also longer to fit your head. Unfortunately, there is no information about the gauge on the Ravelry project page, and I also checked out the pattern and there is no information about the gauge either. It only states that you will need a US 6 or a 4 millimeter needle when a yardage of 77 yards or 70 meters is required. Regarding the finished measurements, you will get a width of 3.75 inches or 9.5 centimeters. And she states that the length, of course, is adaptable. And there is even a photo tutorial in the pattern that shows you how to do this cross or twist at the top of the headband. Let's move on to worsted weight yarn patterns now. And the pattern that I wanted to show you just came out in January of 2025, and it is a design by Thea Coleman called the Boston Bog. It has a gauge of 25 stitches and 24 rows over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. The needle sizes used are a US 5 and a US 8, which corresponds to a 3.75 and a 5 millimeter needle. The yardage required is 175 up to 225 yards, which corresponds to 160 up to 206 meters. This design comes in 3 different sizes with finished measurements of 18 to 22.5 inches or 45.75 up to 57.25 centimeters in the circumference of the hat, and the depth or the length of the hat is 9.5 inches or 24.25 centimeters from the cast on edge up to the center crown. The hat is recommended to be worn with 1 to 2 inches or 2.5 to 5 centimeters of negative ease. And this pattern was designed to celebrate the New England Farm and Fiber Festival that has just happened in Boston at the beginning of February of 2025. Now I hope you found some inspiration in this list of 10 amazing knitting patterns that require only 1 skein of yarn. Please let me know in the comments if you have a favorite knitting pattern that uses only 1 skein of yarn, or if you are maybe excited to try out one of the patterns that I just showed you. I would love to know. Until next time, happy making. Bye guys!